Thank you, everyone, for coming to my talk about nursing bras. They're all sick individuals. I'm Paul Asadoorian. I'll get into more about me very briefly in just a few moments. I want to say thanks to Dale. Where's Dale? Dale, raise your hand. Special thanks to Dale. He's one of our interns at paul.com to help me with some of the research for this talk, which is Security Sucks and You're Wearing the Nursing Bra. And you may say, like, why, what did that title come from? I was coming up with a talk for B-Sides Rhode Island, and my wife, when we had a baby, our second boy, actually, thank you, which means you get to buy like fun onesies, like the Boob Man one, which I have the matching t-shirt, which is nice. But yeah, so it was all about the baby stuff. We're pretty sure that this one's mine, although my older son seems to want to blame the mailman, so if you ask my older son, they're like, oh, he looks just like you. And I'll be like, Brayden, so who do you think you look like? And he goes, the mailman. Thanks, man. All right, so parenthood equals getting to do fun things. I mean, conceiving is wicked fun, too. That's what we say on Rhode Island, is wicked fun. So you get to do things like build a nipple tree, which was not what you expected, right, for a picture of a nipple tree. And you get to dress your kids in nerd shirts as well. And we're driving to New Hampshire, and my older son, to embody the geek spirit, is driving to New Hampshire. And it's New Hampshire, right? It's rustic. We're unplugging. We're not, bringing the phones or anything like that. And out of the blue, Brayden goes, Daddy, does the hotel have Wi-Fi? My wife just looks at me and I'm like, what? I'm like, does it? So my day job is I work for Tenable Network Security. I am the product evangelist. Sometimes I make people say hail Nessus. I won't do that right now though. But I do have some USB thumb drives with the Tenable Network Security podcast on them. So if you come by the paul.com table, I'll give you some. I'll leave a couple up here for a lucky 3 people. Yeah, so that's my day job. I use Tenable products. I tell people about them. It's a lot of fun. I do the paul.com Security Weekly podcast, internet TV show and podcast all rolled into one. It's a lot of fun. We've got lots of fun guests. We've got, more importantly, episode 350 coming up on October 25th. So we're doing that. Thank you. I like to use the popularity of a big episode like that and all the people that we're bringing on the show who are way smarter than me that will attract a lot of people for a good cause. So we're supporting Wings for Warriors, which helps wounded veterans. So that should be a fun day. I get my hands dirty on penetration tests, which is a lot of fun. There's a little bit of that in here as well. So enough about me. Why this talk? Turns out it kind of stems from the podcast that I do every week. And I've covered security news since 2005, and I've seen lots of trends, lots of vulnerabilities that have come and gone, and I've talked to a lot of smart people way smarter than me, right? And I've asked them what I thought were engaging questions, although turns out asking Whitfield Diffie if he likes to go first or second in a game of Ask Grabby Grabby gives a lot of you reasons to make fun of me, and I deserve it. So, yeah, so we've had, and I mean, these people don't magically show up on the show. Executive producer Mike Perez and now executive producer Rob Kornmeyer's. Is Rob in the room? Rob's not here. He's manning our booth, right? So, thanks to those guys, we've had some really great people to come on the show. And I've learned a lot from interviewing those people. I also learned a lot working for a university and then doing penetration testing. I know a lot of trends. And a lot of the trends I notice are not good trends. They're failed trends, right? And we seem to be making a lot of the same mistakes over and over again. And there seems to be some solutions out there that, I think that there are some solutions out there. I know that we've covered a lot of solutions on our podcast, and I've put together little pieces of a tech segment here, an interview there, and a news story there, and I'm like, wow, why aren't more people doing this? So when we get to the solutions section of the talk, that's what I'll cover. So here are the 3, so I identified 3 things. I'm like, if I had to pick 3 trends, and this is of course in kind of my area of expertise and the things that we focus on, I picked 3 things that I think are really broken. Embedded system security is one. A lot of you have heard me talk about embedded system security, right? It's a complete failure, and I'll go into more more detail there. Data security breaches are commonplace. In the news, I talk about a different data breach every single week, both on the Tenable podcast. I mean, it's so bad that I'll do 2 podcasts in a week, or I'll do the Tenable podcast and I'll do the Paul.com podcast. I'll have a security breach or 3 to talk about on Tenable on Tuesday. By the time Thursday rolls around, I'll have another 2 or 3 security breaches to talk about. So, which is nice because I have endless amounts of material. But you know, I think that there's a lot more we can do in the preventable stage. Then there's a right and a wrong way to do patch and vulnerability management, which I find that most people get it wrong. And I find that, you know, obviously this overlaps into the realm of my job at Tenable Network Security, but it's something that so many people are getting wrong, and there's a right way to do it, and no one wants to do it that way because of a lot of different reasons, which we'll go through. Okay, so to kind of relate this to the whole baby theme, right? Embedded systems are kind of like the infant, right? They constantly crap themselves, and then you change their diaper, and then it just keeps happening over and over and over and over again. So embedded systems, it's the same thing. We see these systems that are released, and there's vulnerabilities, and sometimes they clean them up, sometimes they don't, which means they're walking around in a dirty diaper, which is really kind of strange. But anyway, so data security breaches, I find those to be the binky solution, right? They have a breach, something bad happens, well, just put a temporary fix on it. That's exactly what a binky does, right? It's not addressing the problems that a baby needs to sleep, baby needs to eat, and babies poop a lot. They're just temporary measures. And when we experience data breaches or we look at data breaches, they're just putting in temporary measures to solve the problem. LinkedIn, oh, just change your password. It's fine. Don't worry about how we're storing the passwords in the database. No. Don't worry about the SQL injection vulnerabilities that cause the vulnerability. Just, you know, change your passwords. It's fine. Vulnerability management is what I say is the bottle to liquid to food transition. And I don't know if you have kids of your own, you went through this problem, is you keep giving them a bottle and it's just not good enough. Eventually you have to give them some solid food. Vulnerability management's the same way. You may scan your network once a quarter and think that's enough, and it most certainly isn't, right? In the same way you can give a baby a bottle, it'll never be full until you give them solid food. You can rock, swing the binky, swing, give them the binky, walk with them, let the baby kick on mats. The bottom line is they're still hungry. So you can do all those other things in your network, right? You can do some antivirus stuff. You can put intrusion prevention on the network. Those are really just intermediary steps that aren't addressing the real problem. The real problem is you've got vulnerabilities on your network that need a patch. And I've had people come up to me and say, well, we've got a 90-day patch window, and that's what we're comfortable with, and that's what we're going with. Yeah. So are these really the largest problems? Maybe, maybe not. They're what I see as a significant trend in the wrong direction, right? I mean, it's not quite as bad as barbecue sausage in the can, but, and that's kind of a pun about sausage in the can, it's an old joke. Anyway, so what are we going to do about it? I do have some serving suggestions, mostly taking those things I learned and applying them. So I'm not saying, you know, this is the end-all be-all talk and I'm going to tell you how to solve all your problems. These are just 3 trends and some solutions that I've noticed along the way. Okay, so now the first, we have to establish that embedded system security sucks. Okay, now I've gotten up here and told you that, and I'm going to tell you in kind of a different way now. Yeah, those are wrong and the right way to drive baby too. So I decided to try and find some evidence about embedded system security. And I said, well, what if I just search for stinky router? Google image search actually returns a Netgear router when you search for stinky router. I thought that was, well, at least somewhat compelling anyway. Okay, but Paul, I mean, you wouldn't just come right out and say that embedded systems, that their baby's ugly, right? I guess I just did. Okay, so here's an ugly baby, okay? Doesn't matter how you dress it up. how cute clothing you put on it, and a little hat, it's still ugly. I don't know if you can see this very well, but it says in this box, and this is some random machine that my good friend Bob found on the internet, and right here it says default : admin/1234. Below that, it says your password will be sent unencrypted. So don't even make me use Google to find what the default password is, and then tell me that I'm going to transmit it in clear text because it's not going to use a silly thing like an SSL. And it's telling me this, right in the little dialog box. But of course, then the big argument, of course, is that big companies, well, we don't run this stuff. This is only stuff that, your grandma uses or that people use at home. There's no way that a large, major corporation will run something like a Netgear WGT624 or a WGR614, or heaven forbid, a large company would run something like a Linux BEFSR. I call it a beef serb, but that's just me. Beef serb 41, right, which is a hub. It's not even a wireless router. That's a hub, right? Well, it's probably a switch, but under the covers, it's probably really a hub. But anyway, no one would ever, in a big company, run this kind of stuff, right? They have contracts with Cisco and HP, and they wouldn't run this kind of stuff until you look on Shodan. Hello. Now, trust me, these are big companies. I obscure the names. The last time I gave this talk, it wasn't recorded. I did obscure the names. But what I did was I gave you the Shodan search to go find them. Right? So these are big companies. This is big company with 2 letters that makes lots of printers. I want to protect the companies here, so I'm not going to tell you who they are. And they've got a WGT624 version 3 and a WGR614 version 10. Exposed to the internet that was found by Shodan. Right down here, we've got a big software company that makes software that's not doors, but, and they, again, protecting the innocent here, again, they're running the Linux beef serb 41. And this is what I find in a lot of large environments, right? Is that companies do have these embedded systems installed on their network. And you can find evidence of that. Okay, so a little more on embedded systems, right? Why is it hacking like it's 1999? Devices are shipping with all these vulnerabilities, buffer overflows, command injection. The small footprint means that ASLR and DEP are often left out, or they are, what I found from my good friend Zachary Cutlip, they do use some level of memory protection, but it's not very good memory protection. So the randomization of memory is really random. Because it's hard to put that in such a small footprint on a device, right? We're dealing with devices that have a very, very small area of RAM, a very small area of flash, which means that the first thing I often leave out is security. And I've also found that among embedded device developers, there's a lot of high reuse of code. Has anyone tried to cross-compile software for an embedded device? Anyone? Anyone? Is that a lot of fun? No, it's horrible, right? It makes you want to pull your hair out. I mean, okay, never mind. That's why I don't have as much hair, right? So that's what I find is some of the things that are driving this embedded device security to be in the toilet, essentially. And I wanted to look at some other evidence of that. So we can hack like it's 1999, except now we can use Python. On PublicCon episode 342, Zach Cutlip demonstrated remote buffer overflow on a D-Link DR815. This was the first time this exploit had ever been published. He did it for the show. While he was on the show, it took him about 2 hours to discover the vulnerability and write the exploit. Or I think just write the exploit. I think his coworker found the exploit. He did that prior to the show, so if you watch the show, it's not 2 hours of him behind the keyboard writing the exploit, because that would be boring. So the vulnerability may have been known, but the exploit was not. He traced it back to an unbounded sprintf function in the CGI program that runs the web server. Is this a problem we've known about for like 20 years, maybe? Just checking. Maybe those D-Link developers need to go read FRAC 49 that was published in 1996 and realize the origins of some of the original buffer overflows that exist in software, but apparently they don't. So he wrote an exploit that doesn't require authentication. So you don't have to be logged into this router. This means you can exploit the router without the username and password if the admin interface is exposed to the internet. And it's a really nice buffer overflow because, again, it's in the CGI program. So there's on embedded systems, typically there's a small little web server, and then there's this gigantic binary blob that basically does everything else. It implements the web interface, it implements all of the calls to when you push a button in the web interface to make a configuration change, it handles all of that. And the reason they do that is because of the small footprint, they can't fit something on there like a Ruby application or PHP. There's no concept of those languages or there is, but a lot of devices are so small, you can't do that. So basically what you have to do is the equivalent of someone writing their own version of PHP in a gigantic binary blob. And lo and behold, it has vulnerabilities, go figure, right? So what Zach Cutlip did is he wrote an exploitation framework for MIPS called Bowcaster. You can download it. You can download the exploit that he wrote on the show, or demonstrated on the show, and you can see a video of what he did on our website. And this is, again, off-the-shelf hardware that anyone can go buy. Now, certainly, if someone went to the store and they bought a D-Link router, or they have a D-Link router, the D-Link, in its infinite wisdom, would tell people, hey, there's some glaring vulnerabilities in these routers and you should update the firmware and get that taken care of. Not really, turns out. That it's not perfectly clear whether or not there's a glaring vulnerability. So the firmware that this vulnerability exists in is like 1.00, version 1.0. And 1.04 is the only firmware that's listed as available for download at D-Link's website. And thankfully enough, they provide us with some release notes, right? Which should tell us that, hey, there's this glaring vulnerability that can allow anyone on the internet to take over your router remotely, or anyone on your Wi-Fi to take over your router. But in the release notes they say, we fixed an LED behavior. They fixed the blinking lights. Thanks for that, D-Link. We fixed a cloned MAC address issue in DHCP mode, and we enhanced performance. Nothing about a glaring, remotely exploitable vulnerability in their firmware, which is kind of sad. And that deserves the baby facepalm. Just because when a regular facepalm doesn't cut it, yeah, we need a baby facepalm. So this kind of ties into, right? No one pays attention to these devices. These devices are in someone's basement. They're falling behind the desk just collecting dust because they often just work. And updates could break things. A lot of people don't even know software could be applied to them. They receive a lower priority than patching desktops and servers, again, because they just work. The interesting thing is a lot of people, because they don't contain sensitive data, oh, it's not really PCI compliant. There's no credit card data on them, right? There's no sensitive data. They're not controlling users. It's not the Active Directory controller, right? There's no user data on there. The problem is that it passes data, right? It's data in transit. Data in transit is going through these systems, right? Printers, wireless access points, switches. Attackers could use them to gain a foothold and put in proxies that sniff passwords. H. Moore talked about that earlier when he talked about the gigantic botnet that infected 400,000 routers on the internet. And while the code that they uploaded to these routers was just doing the scanning of the internet and sending the results back to a central point, they could have very easily uploaded any kind of malware on these systems. They did anything. They snooped on all your data, that changed all your DNS entries to point to an attacker's DNS server, okay? The other thing that's interesting is that they can allow attackers to monitor things like video teleconferencing, which you may not think is a big deal, but consider that there are groups out there that are doing not threat intelligence, but open source intelligence gathering. And that's their main goal in life, is pick a random company, find out everything they can about it, build a profile of that company, and then they sell that information to someone who's going to exploit it. And I think that if I could sniff everything that was happening in your conference rooms throughout the day, that would be useful intelligence gathering. Now, is the problem getting worse? What I find interesting is that security evaluators, right, published this case about Soho routers, and they categorized a whole bunch of vulnerabilities. Now, they didn't find anything that was trivial, remotely exploitable. Obviously, they didn't talk to Zachary Cutler. But they've got a lot of other advisories for systems, some that were to be announced at the time that this was written. Okay? If you look back through history, there's always been this level of fail on embedded systems. Felix Linder reported this in Black Hat 2009. If we fast forward to 2012, there was a cross-site file upload vulnerability in the WT54GL. Wi-Fi protected systems in May of 2012 was cracked. And the list goes on and on and on. H.G. Moore, right, did some SSDP work that was released in 2013. And we can go right up till today, right? We talked about independent security evaluators. There was another person who disclosed 5 vulnerabilities in Linksys routers, and Cisco did not issue fixes for those. That was one that I found for the podcast. That happened in April of 2013. He disclosed these 5 vulnerabilities, and Cisco decided never to fix them. Okay. So hopefully at this point you believe embedded system security sucks, the problem's getting worse, and that these systems pose risk to your network, right? Scary, but true. All right, let's talk about security breaches. So I was searching for security breaches, right? And there was that movie Security Breach. And what's interesting, I was looking for quotes from the movie, because I was like, well, maybe I can relate this to like Hollywood, and there'll be a cool quote about security breaches that'll be like stupid and ridiculous, and everyone will laugh when they see the slide. But I didn't. The quotes page for the movie Security Breach actually points to the page for the Shawshank Redemption. Coincidence? Not sure. Okay, so using information from the data loss DB, I found that most people are hacked. And you might say, well, what does that mean? There's a lot of hacking going on the internet. Well, 27% here are due to result of a hack, okay? The other data breaches, right, are stolen laptops. I'm not sure what web means. Does that mean it's a web hack? So I don't know if we can combine web and hack. But a lot of people will come out and say, well, insider threat and all this other stuff, and most breaches happen because people lose a laptop, and no, it's due to hacking. Right? If you think about it in your own organizations, and I used to get this at university all the time, people would be like, well, you must have students hacking into everything. I'm like, no, it's pretty much the opposite. Everyone's hacking into the students. It's really what happens. So let's go with the assumption now that most people are hacked. And most people are hacked from the inside. Most people think, oh, there's this physical attack and someone snuck in and put this device on the network and they had access to everything. No, when in fact most data breaches 57% in fact are hacked from the outside. Okay? Only 5% from the inside. And again, this comes from Data Loss DB. I'm gonna go out on a limb. I don't think I have any really overly compelling data on this, but I think if we were to do a quick poll, how many people think that most data breaches are a result of a SQL injection vulnerability? That's it? More? Maybe? Maybe people are shaking their heads yes. No one's throwing things at me, so I guess that's good. So I found a couple of references to that, right? 97% of data breaches. Now 97% is a little high. That might be a little high, you think. But that came from an article. This one says 80% of breaches against all web applications come from SQL injection and cross-site scripting. But if we look at some of the major breaches, right, that breached the most records, this comes from the SQL Injection Hall of Fame. I mean, if you look at what they stole, it's likely, even if they didn't come out and say it was SQL injection, it was probably SQL injection. Because they're downloading the entire database, right? We look at Living Social and LinkedIn and Yahoo and NASA. They leaked plain text passwords, hash passwords, email addresses, and passwords, okay? That tells me that primarily the attack vector was SQL injection. But SQL injection is really old, right? I mean, we can look back to 1998. Rainforest Puppy and Frag 54 talked about SQL injection. It was the earliest reference I could find from SQL injection. And then, you know, the history goes on. Rainforest Puppy does a little more research until September 2000, where David Litchfield talked about it, and then I referenced another Litchfield presentation here that had some of this history in it. So SQL injection is really old. I mean, not as old as Jack, but he's not here, which is good because he'd throw things at me. And this is about the time that Jack would say, "You'll be old too someday, if you're lucky." That's my best Jack Daniel impression. So developers, the scary thing for me about SQL injection is that developers still don't understand the problem. We've talked about it since 1998, probably sooner, but they still don't understand the problem. And if you go through and you read this stackoverflow.com post, you will want to cry in a fetal position, okay? I got binkies for you if you need them after you read this, because you're going to need one. It's just really frightening about, it's essentially the age-old problem of someone wants to implement encryption, and they think it's a great idea to write their own encryption algorithm. It's not a good idea, right? Not unless you're Brian Snow and working for the NSA. It's the same thing when developers think, well, I got the SQL injection problem licked. I'll just whip up this little code right here, look how awesome I am, and then you as a security person, or a developer with some security knowledge, looks at it and goes, that's absolutely ridiculous, and you can bypass it in 6 or 7 different ways. And that's what people are doing out here on the internet. If you go read these things on Stack Overflow, you find a lot of things like that. So, very scary. Okay. So hopefully at this point, you believe that lib injection is not the answer. And that most security breaches are a result of evil hacking, most are a result of SQL injection, and that SQL injection is an old problem that developers have not really truly learned how to fix. Okay, no one's throwing things at me, that's good. All right, vulnerability management. This is one that is, of course, near and dear to my heart. I want to talk first about some, what I would call patching myths. And despite popular belief in Florida, Mountain Dew and marijuana do not prevent against pregnancy. I'm sure you had the same problem in South Dakota, Joe. So, a lot of people will tell me everything in our environment is up to date on patches. And I'm like, really? You know that for sure? And then I do Nessus scan against them, and they're like, what are all those vulnerabilities? And I'm like, well, what happened to, I thought everything was up to date on patches. And it doesn't really go well from there. They say, we scan our environment to make sure that patches are applied. What do you scan your environment with? Or our patch management system gives me a report, and it tells me that everything's patched. Like, you ever looked on the actual systems themselves to see if everything's patched? No? Oh, okay. And normally when they do say they scan, they're like, yeah, we scan our environment, we make sure everything's patched. I'm like, how often? They're like once a year, we dust off of the Nessus server, and we take it out, and we scan our whole network with it. A lot of people will also say, we check for third-party patches. Do you really now? A lot of people don't. And a lot of people will miss systems. And that's really hard to do, especially if you have 100,000 desktops. It can be a really tough thing. Some people will say to me, in fact, because I'll tell them, like, look, you can find all the vulnerabilities in your environment, or pretty close to 100%, right? If you look for them. And they're like, why would we want to do that? I'm like, what? And they're like, well, our patch cycle is 90 days, so even if we knew about all of them, it would take us 90 days to patch them, and then there would just be more, so, like, why bother?
Why make the bet?
Why bother trying, right? Why don't we all just go drink at the So the reality is that most people don't know all the devices that exist, let alone all the vulnerabilities that are present. I walk into some networks, and that should be your job as a penetration tester, right? You should go in and identify and say, hey, look, did you see that big shiny thingy over there? And they're like, what's that? And they're like, it's got like all your data on it. Oh yeah? Well, what can you do with it? It's vulnerable. And they have no idea that it existed. So you can't say that you're going to patch everything in your environment if you don't know where everything is. Scanning, again, for some is every once in a while. Some people rely on contractors, and a lot of people will exclude patching and scanning. And they'll be like, okay, so what about this range? Oh, you can't scan that range. That's where a voice over IP system is, and it gets very, very angry if you scan it, and it will attack you. Like in that episode of the X-Files where the elevator kills the person. And I'm like, no. They're like, no, really, don't scan it, it's bad luck. If scanning's done at all, it's likely not able to catch third-party patches, right? So that's a problem too. But let's talk more about patch fail. Well, it's seasonal. It's Halloween, it's fall. You don't appreciate my festiveness? Sheesh. Patches suck for a lot of reasons, right? The thing that gets me about patches, right, is I've been covering patches for a long time, and I always tell people, you should apply patches. And then when you think about patches, it's like, well, patches is just more software to fix already broken software with more software. And of course, Microsoft gets that right every single time, and they never have to pull back a patch because it broke a bunch of stuff. It never happens. So patches do break things. Patches need to be tested. They don't always stick, it's interesting. I don't think that there's a lot of people talking about this particular problem. And people that are big on patches, or people are like, oh, I've got a 90-day patch cycle. I'm like, well, how often do you check to make sure those stick? Oh, every 90 days. And so things could go on forever and never really be patched, right? Because backups will install old software, right? If you're a systems administrator, maybe you applied some patches a month ago, and then you found a problem. What's one of the things they'll do? They'll restore a backup and restore that software. Now you just reintroduce the vulnerability. This problem is exponentially worse when we talk about virtualization, because now it's just not software, it's entire systems, right? So with virtualization, I've kind of got like this like 2 or 3 part thing that applies to patches and how it can really make your life suck. One, it increases our attack surface exponentially, right? Okay, create a new virtual machine, clone this virtual machine, create a new virtual machine. Oh, I need a machine for this. Deploying a new server used to be getting this actual physical piece of metal, dragging it into the data center, filling out a whole bunch of paperwork. Now it's just like click, new virtual machine. So increasing your attack surface. The other thing that it does is it makes you start playing whack-a-mole, right? Oh, I'm going to build this new virtual machine, I'm going to install a bunch of software, oh, pause. Okay, now I'm going to build this new virtual machine. Oh, I need that other one again. 3 months later, resume. Am I really going to patch that, right? So now your vulnerabilities are jumping around all over the place. Sometimes you'll have 2 instances of the same application that will be on the system, and your patch management system goes, hey, look, I patched you. When really there's another version of Java installed for another thing in a different path, and that's the one that gets exploited, and you wonder why there's malware on it. And I talked about the emergency fixes kind of thing. So I wrote a blog post about this a while back. I think it's kind of an interesting thing about patch management and how it's really broke. I talked about the virtualization thing. Yeah, and what about patching your hypervisor, right? That can be a real bitch too. You have to take everything down if you have not built 2 of your virtualization environments. The interesting thing though where virtualization really helps is if you listen to the Rich Mogul interview that we did a few episodes back on paul.com, Rich was talking about using the API to your cloud service providers to create new and manage existing virtual machines. And he said the technology is getting so good that if you've got a system running out there and you need to patch it, rather than patch that running instance, you just build a new one and redeploy it. And I think that's really, really cool use of virtualization. All right, so hopefully you believe it's really hard to enforce patch management and patch application. You believe that most people probably do vulnerability management wrong. Are you laughing at my picture? Yes. Yes. Yeah, it says, "Welcome home, Dad," and she's pregnant. And Dad was gone less than 9 months. Oops. Okay, so now some solutions. If your wife's out and you have the baby, not a solution. Just for you new dads out there that might be not a solution. All right, so, to address the software problem, to address some of the embedded device security problems, right? I think that education and working with developers is the way to go. You need to educate and work with developers. How am I doing on time, by the way?
14 minutes.
Okay, good. Plenty of time for questions. I'm not leaving my phone that close to Trent without being in my pocket. All right, so you're going to work with developers and systems administrators and give them better tools. I recently watched a presentation from someone who was really big and said some great things about software security, right? Rather than getting all the way to the end of the process with software that's vulnerable, why don't we not, he wasn't even a big fan of educating developers. He said it's static analysis, it's good QA to find the bugs while the software is being developed, and it's architectural review. And I agree with all those things. And if all those things worked all the time, we wouldn't have any software security problems. The problem is, we still do. But I think there's a lot to be said, right, for finding bugs and flaws in development. Even a step further than that, right, is to have good architecture so that security flaws and bugs don't go in there. Oh, he also said that the difference, and I'll quote him now because I'm going to use some of his material, but Gary McGraw said that there's a difference between bugs and flaws. And you only need to define the flaw portion of the equation here. And a flaw is, I forgot to add authentication to the application. Oops, that's a flaw, right? And then he said something that really speaks to my embedded device security problem. So I'm going to share that with you now. He said, I was in a room of software developers at a chip manufacturer, and he asked the question, how many bugs versus flaws do you think exist in applications? So what percentage of them are bugs, what percentage of them are flaws? Anyone? Anyone? Yeah, 50-50, very good. So 50-50, but when he asked this to the developer, someone would raise their hand very excited and said, 70-70. That explains the embedded device problem pretty well, I thought. So that's how much luck you'll have with architectural security being built into your applications. But arm your developers with static analysis tools, arm your QA with tools to be able to find those vulnerabilities. And then, of course, I still think you need penetration testing once the app is in process, because you're going to find the gaps in that process, you're going to find things that people didn't consider, you're going to find ways that when you put all of the pieces together, right, if you're looking at static analysis, one developer is running this against his own code. What a penetration test can do that no other process can do is that once it's all put together, test for vulnerabilities once all the pieces are linked together, which I think is where you find some interesting stuff. Focus less on traditional defenses. John's giving a talk tomorrow on offensive countermeasures, which is kind of the new defensive tactics that we've been talking about. And change your outlook on patch management. Just to give you a little more insight into the embedded systems realm, I actually read a paper, and Gary McGraw's like haunting me. He was one of the authors of this paper. And it's not a bad paper, I agree with what they're saying, but it's kind of interesting. If you read this paper, which is titled Security as a New Dimension in Embedded Systems Design, and this was in 2004. Okay, we're a little late to the party for security and embedded systems by 2004. But they said today, secure embedded system design remains a field in its infancy in terms of pervasive deployment and research. Is this, how do we change this? How do we get it out of its infancy? I still think that consumers and economics play a huge factor. When you go to buy a new wireless router, you're kind of a poor demographic for that. When your family members who are not computer security professionals go to the store to buy a new printer, a new wireless router, or a new smartphone, how many of them rank security as the #1 thing in the list of features that they want, right? Okay, now how many people think that color is the #1 thing that they look at when buying those devices, right? I want the green one, the new iPhone, it's green, it's awesome, and if you lick it, it's mint flavored, it's great, tasty. So, has that changed with Android and iOS? I mean, just the answer to the question that people base color primarily on the devices they choose means no, which means that economics and security don't agree, right? It's not an economic driving factor to add security, so I think we're always going to have this problem, and I think that's something that is not addressed in this paper and a lot of other things, is those economic drivers. I don't have a really good way to make that as an economic driver. Maybe it will come with time. I do want to talk about the Phoenix Project, right? This is Gene Kim. We interviewed him on episode 316. We interviewed Dr. Gene Spafford on episode 318. Now, what's interesting, when I talk to interesting people and I ask them those interesting 5 questions at the end of the interview, Spaff, I believe, had the best answer to the question, stranded on a desert island, would you bring an Android tablet, an iPad, or a Surface? And his answer, the Dallas Cowboy cheerleader team. Best answer ever to that question. So, I mean, this is really about DevOps having a good relationship with developers and systems administrators, right? Tying together security, availability, integrity, and change management in your environments. Everyone I've talked to that's read this book has loved it. People give it to their management. It's really about how to get security done in your environment. And it can address those challenges of patch management that we talked about, can address some of those embedded device vulnerabilities and prevent insecure embedded devices, can even help your software development lifecycle as well. This is a great, what I think is one of the most groundbreaking ways in which we can improve security. We heard H.D. Moore and Ed talk this morning about empowering us to do things, to fix things. This is one of the things that I've identified that is really going to help us. And by the way, I don't get any kickback from Gene for plugging his book either. I haven't given up on education, I think primarily for developers. Some people have given up on education completely. I think that we do a poor job relating to developers, and I think we do a lot of finger pointing, right, and not enough just sitting down at the level and totally getting to know them. I mean, at the end of the day, we're kind of calling their baby ugly, right, because it's their code, and we shouldn't do that. I think there's a lot of ways in which we can help developers. If you talk to people who train developers for security, it's not high up on the list of priority. A good friend of mine does training for developers and sometimes teaches security classes to them, and he says, I ask people, who here has heard of cross-site scripting? And, maybe 10 or 20% of the hands go up. He's like, basically after that, I talk about SQL injection and I get 1 or 2 hands, and then like cross-site request forgery, they look at me like I'm completely nuts. I think that there's a lot of work to do with educating developers in terms of security. The reality is, though, the scary part for me is that no matter how much we talk about educating developers and getting better software, deadlines will always trump security, right? And that's the scary reality, which relates back to the economics problem. Okay, so I'm going to very quickly, we've got antivirus, firewalls, and IDS. Think outside of that stuff when you're defending your networks, right? More about processes. Check out offensive countermeasures. For SQL injection defense, I got 2 things for SQL injection defense that we've had in the show that I don't think not enough people are implementing or know about. Green SQL, right? They've got a free version. We interviewed David Mamet in episode 185. Right? They make firewalls that filter SQL injection between the web server and the database. Like I said, there's a free version of their product. I don't have a lot of people coming up to me going, hey, I installed this and it's great, it's really helping with the SQL injection problem. And everyone has the SQL injection problem, right? Also, now I'm not a full-time developer anymore, which is good because we'd have a lot more insecure code if I was. But Dan Kaminsky has a great project with some code samples, Interoperleak. He presented it in August 2010 on episode 208 of Paul.com. I think it's a fantastic framework for solving the SQL injection problem. You know, take that data coming from the user, extrapolate it out, put some good common sense security around your libraries that are doing that, and you can really have an impact on the SQL injection code. Now he's got some examples there, and I'm curious to see what people think of that, if people are developers or have shared this with their developers. Tell me why people aren't implementing this. So vulnerability management the right way, this kind of ties into some of these things that Gene Kim's talking about, right? Define your policies and procedures, work with your administrators to develop a plan, implement a plan to harden and control systems. So it's a two-phased approach, right? You need to harden your systems, and you need to have good change management. You can't have one without the other. Some people have fantastic change management, but do nothing to harden the security of their systems. Some people go crazy gangbusters hardening their systems, but there's no change control, which is bad. Scan your environment, distribute. Now this is the step 5 here, listed here, that most people forget, right? Distribute the results to people who can fix the problems. Like a lot of people go, my vulnerability scanner is cranking, this is awesome, but they're never giving those results to people who can actually fix the problem. So yeah, and repeat those steps on a regular basis. I want to leave some room for questions and make sure I put up the end slide. So that's the presentation. I want to just, if you want the slides, you can join our mailing list. You can scan that QR code there, or you can go to the paul.com/insider. And again, all our blogs, videos, podcasts are available on our website. If you want to contact me directly, that's my new easy to remember address. If you want to come work with me and Jack Daniel at Tenable Network Security, it's a lot of fun. You can work with me and Jack. And we're hiring tons of people. We're basically doubling the size of the company again. And if you want consulting, there's Black Hills Information Security, who John and I are partnered together on the consulting front. So we'll use us for that. That's there. Thank you for attending the talk. I can probably take 1 or 2 questions. I'll be around all weekend, so feel free to, we can buy each other drinks. How's that? All right. Do you have a question back there, sir?
Just for the record, you go first or second when you ask grabbing your
It depends on who's playing.
He plays with himself.
Most of the time I do play with myself. Do you have a question? Right.
Back of dead.
Yeah, so the question is, industrial systems all have embedded devices, and they all have really long patch windows, and that's really scary. Yeah, it's very scary. Oh, that's yours. That was for me to give to someone else. And since you picked it up, drink. Drink, 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 drink. Boy, did you mess up. Why did you pick that up? Didn't you think I was gonna let you get away with not drinking it?
So we at Paul.com Security Weekly love the delicious taste of Smirnoff Ice. Fuck you.
It's not bad.
It's true.
It's just so funny because you suck at that so bad. Fail. He took like 1 sip.
We really appreciate
My
your sponsor, Smirnoff Ice. Why do I have to do this, man? This is horrible.
My grandmother can chug that faster than you.
Your grandmother drinks Smirnoff Ice all the time.
She's dead.
Dude, if anybody else want it, man, come up here. You try this. Tell me if this is as bad as I think it is. Yummy.
It's even better when it's warm,
It's
huh?
the Paul.commiest of shitty ice water.
You could have finished that. I iced you.